So today we're talking about the subject of temptation. Everybody looks forward to this one. And this rendering that we have actually is an artistic rendering or imagination of the temptation of Jesus that we're going to get into in a little bit. You sort of Jesus in the foreground there, and then there's this figure in the back, that is tempting and going to cause some problems. And so just to kind of break the ice with you, just wondering what is a temptation of yours that is fairly perennial? What comes up for you? You don't have to say it out loud because I don't want you to embarrass yourself, but it's but I'm just curious what it is. For me, I have probably a handful, but cookies, man, cookies. Somebody brings a plate of cookies into my office. They may even suggest to take those home. They're not going home. No, they're going to be gone within 10 minutes of that person leaving. I'm terrible. I have zero self-control when it comes to cookies and sweets in general. I'm a real sucker for sweets. If it's ice cream, my favorite, probably one of my favorite emotional stress food is a milkshake. Jack in the Box, their Oreo cookie milkshake is fantastic. I just want to give that recommendation out to any of you. So probably food in general, we do that. We comfort ourselves, soothe ourselves with that. Some of you, it may be exercise, strangely, because some people really, that's your thing. You're feeling anxious, and so you just need to burn it out. And I've known some people that, even though that sounds really healthy, there's a temptation to even go too far with that. And it starts to do things that you don't expect. Sex, of course, is famous throughout history as a way to whatever, but the temptation of that is certainly out there. But there's also other temptations. Like, have you ever been in let's call it a hot discussion with somebody? Could be somebody you don't know well, could be a social media chat, fight kind of a thing, could be your significant other, could be your kid, could be a coworker, whatever. And have you ever been tempted in that argument, especially if they take a shot that's a little bit personal or just goes a little bit different direction, a little bit more of a jab? Have you ever been tempted to jab back, to let that conversation just go south in a hurry, right? That's a different kind of temptation. So we're talking about this general subject today, and the line that we're looking at from the prayer that Jesus taught is just simply this: lead us not into temptation. And we're taking a slow walk through first the Sermon on the Mount, but then now, because the Lord's Prayer is taught in the Sermon on the Mount, we're going really slow through the Lord's Prayer. And this line has always bugged me. It's never really added up logically for me. And the reason why it hasn't is theologically. I can't believe that God, being totally good and loving and kind and shalom-oriented, would ever tempt us away from that shalom. You know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense to me. So theologically, I've got a problem with the line. So Jesus, I've got a problem with your language here, which we'll help explain in just a moment. But then also on another theological frame, there's another reason why I can't really go there with it. Now, if you believe in sort of a classic rendering of the character and nature of God, where you may say that God is loving, but you also have a belief that God is in absolute control of everything. So you hear this socially all the time. Everything happens for a reason, right? And usually when people use that line, they're saying that there's some greater force out there that we call God that is making sure that everything happens in the reason, just as it's supposed to be. I had a friend email me this week, his regrets that he wasn't going to be able to make an interfaith luncheon, and he used an expression. He's a pastor, and his theological tradition, he said, well, I'm not going to be able to make it because Thursdays are just too busy, but in God's perfect timing, perhaps I will. And the communication there is that if God wills it, if God controls the board so that I come, then I guess I'll make it. You know what I mean? So that's one vision of thinking about God in control. And I don't think God's in control. I don't think God is controlling. I don't think when we say everything happens for a reason, I don't immediately think God did it. I think, yeah, life circumstances. That led us to this situation that we're in right now. I don't blame God for that, or I don't credit God for how the board is moving. I don't think that's how God works. This is my theological position. But because of that, I can't imagine saying, lead us not into temptation, as if God was controlling me into temptation, both from his character and then his nature, God's nature. See what I'm saying here? Well, luckily, there's some things that we can think about. So I just put this up there. This is us saying, Dear God, lead us not into temptation. And then God has God's response, no problem. I cannot lead you astray. So that's a bedrock position for me. I don't think God is capable of leading us astray. I think God is always about shalom. I think that's God's primary nature. Love would be another one that goes with it, but I like shalom in its fullness. And everything God does is shalomi. That's our word. Meaning that even if I don't like it, so if God is leading me to say, take a hard look at myself, that is a very shalomi thing to do, even if I don't like it. So it doesn't mean that I have to like everything, doesn't make God a doormat, just, oh yeah, do whatever feels good. We'll find out that's not it. We found out we have a language problem with this line. Neil Douglas Klotz, who is an Aramaic scholar and also a poet and a broader scholar beyond that, he took a look at this. Look what he has to say on this. I thought this was quite fascinating. These are probably the least understood and, because of the Greek version, the most mistranslated lines in the prayer. Lead us not into temptation. The most mistranslated line in the prayer. In the Aramaic version, no one outside leads us into temptation, least of all God. This is the Aramaic. Wela talan could be translated, don't let us enter, don't let us be seduced by the appearance of, or don't let us heap up what is false or illusory in. Nesyuna, which is that word temptation, could be translated temptation in the Aramaic sense of something that leads to inner vacillation or agitation, diverting us from the purpose of our lives. What he's saying is this is more of, lead us not to temptation is more, don't let us get off course. Let us stay centered in who we are. He goes on to give us even more color. The old roots call up the picture of a flag waving in the wind, blown here and there, like a mind rendered uncertain by the seductions of materialism, including spiritual materialism. It is the picture of forgetfulness, a losing of oneself in appearances, a failure to look deeper when the situation calls for it. We come again to see our limitations as well as the pain and suffering we cause ourselves and the rest of creation. The prayer here reminds us not to forget our origins in creation and the divine breath, nor to burn out over all the needs to be done. One final thing from him, and then we want to hear how he would translate this. He finally says, don't let us be deluded by the surface of life, but neither let us become so inward and self-absorbed that we cannot act simply and humanly at the right time. That last part is really important, at the right time. The prayer reminds us that sometimes our ideals, including those of holiness, peace, and unity, carry us into the future or the past and make it difficult to be in the present, where help is needed now. So, when he put pen to paper to give us his interpretation in a poetic way, what lead us not into temptation might come across at, or more reflect the person and language of Jesus, this is what he came up with. Do not let surface things delude us, but free us from what holds us back from our true purpose. Don't let us enter forgetfulness, the temptation of false appearances, to the fraud of inner vacillation, like a flag tossed in the wind. Alert us. But break the hold of unripeness. What an interesting word. Break the hold of unripeness, the inner stagnation that prevents good fruit. From the evil of injustice, the green fruit and the rotten, grant us liberty. Deceived neither by the outer nor the inner, free us to walk your path with joy. Keep us from hoarding false wealth and from the inner shame of help not given in time. What an interesting thing to say. help not given in time. Keep us from hoarding false wealth and from the inner shame of help not given in time. Do not let surface things delude us, he says again, but free us from what holds us back. We're going to come to this again at the end. Anytime I think about the subject of temptation, lots of images come to mind from the Bible. Temptation's all over the place in the biblical narrative. But the first one that comes to mind for me is not Adam and Eve, which a lot of people think, or David and Bathsheba, that's another whopper. But I think about Jesus, because he had a great story that was part of his entire story. In fact, it starts off with this. Just to give you some context, when he had his temptation experience, it was right after he was baptized. That baptism started his public ministry. He was maybe somewhere between 30 and 36 years old when he started. In his day and age, that made him at least middle-ager or even a senior adult, just because of how long people lived back then. They didn't live quite as long. If you made it to 40, it's pretty impressive. You see some that live much longer, but not for the most part. So he was a wise old man at 36 years old when he had his baptism with John that totally changed his life. At least that's what his life totally changed, let's put it that way. However you think of him before that moment, we know that everything changed at that baptism. And the first thing that he did was he went up into the wilderness for time to sort things out. I'm going to read this to you. It's very brief. It's only 11 verses, but it's packed with deep symbolism. So this is how the story goes, according to Matthew. So after his baptism, then the Spirit led Jesus up into the wilderness so that the devil might tempt him. Just a word of note here. Some of you immediately, when you hear about the devil talking and Satan figure and all that, you're checking out and you're like, okay, I don't know if I buy this devil stuff, so I'm just going to not listen anymore. I hear you. I don't blame you. Kind of with you on that. You don't hear this. You don't need a Satan figure. You don't need a devilish person or a personification of evil for evil to exist. There's all kinds of evil in the world. I don't think you need the hierarchy with a Satan on top for that to be real. So if you want to hear something different, if you want to hear the temptation of something else, then hear that. But I want to give you permission that you have the right to question some of the things that they took as for granted. So then the Spirit led Jesus up into the wilderness so that the devil might tempt him. After Jesus had fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, he was starving. The tempter came to him and said, "Since you are God's son, command these stones to become bread." That makes sense. Jesus replied, "It is written, people won't live only by bread, but by every word spoken by God." After that, the devil brought him into the holy city and stood him at the highest point of the temple. He said to him, "Since you are God's son, throw yourself down, for it is written, I will command my angels concerning you, and they will take you up in their hands so that you won't hit your foot on a stone." Jesus replied, "Again, it's written, don't test the Lord your God." Then the devil brought him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. He said, "I'll give you all these if you bow down and worship me." Jesus responded, "Go away, Satan, because it's written, you will worship the Lord your God and serve him only." The devil left him, and the angels came and took care of him. So I want to unpack these because this narrative actually gives us a framework to think about the general idea of temptation for all of us, not just Jesus. He certainly had his own pieces, and he's working things out about who he's going to be. That's why the temptation scene existed in the first place. This isn't just this random story that we have, that three of the Gospels give us. Unfortunately, Jesus forgot to take his phone, or it ran out of battery, and he didn't record any of this stuff to see what actually transpired. It's not meant to be that way. This is meant for us to chew on and wonder, what is Jesus dealing with when he's out there? So let's just walk through this thing briefly and see what we have. The first one we have has to do with bread. Turn stone to bread because you're really hungry. This really has to do with being tempted by physical urges. And my hunch is that this is, when I talk about chocolate chip cookies, that's part of it. However, I'm usually not going crazy like Cookie Monster on those chocolate chip cookies because I'm so hungry. it's usually driven by something else. Something else is making me want to eat something. It's my self-medication, right? And we all have our form of this. It's not because of the actual hunger. Sometimes maybe it is. But it's something that is doing for me. I want that endorphin kick, and nothing like 6 or 12 or 24 cookies is going to do just that. I don't know what it is for you, but my question for you on that, and this is the one that we usually go to when we think about temptation, is these physical things that happen. How are we being seduced into this? So my question is, how are we tempted to satisfy our cravings? And if this is on a relational front, it doesn't always start off with, just sex, but it's sort of heading there. If that's your world, you need to think about what's happening, what's transpiring, what is being cultivated in you, what is being tempted in you. Because sometimes, at least according to the experts that talk about significant relationships and why people stray from each other and all that happen, it's almost always because something's happening out here. There's some level of ill health happening in the relationship. And some greener grass is happening here. Oftentimes it's in the workplace. That's where they develop almost all the time. Or maybe it's just a school or community or whatever. And something about that is feeling better than the relationship that you're in. And usually the people, at least according to one expert, they don't even know what's starting to happen. They're just sort of getting this friendship. It sure feels good. It feels so tight. This one over here continues to feel colder and colder. This one's feeling hotter and hotter. And lo and behold, over time, this thing develops into something that's hard to turn back from. And people cross lines, and if they go back, they'll say, I never meant to get here. It just sort of developed into that. Well, in those early stages, if it's a relationship, if it's exercise, if it's food, if it's drinking, whatever, what is being soothed in us? Because so often we are trying to meet an emotional need with something physical. So food for thought. I don't know your life exactly, but I do know that most of you are human beings, and you're going to deal with this kind of stuff. And it's wise. I think the whole point of this verse of the prayer is to be mindful. What is leading us to do the things that we're doing? What need is being met? Well, the second one is sort of an interesting one. It has to do with being tempted in another way. This is the one, throw yourself off a high point and ask God to save you with his angels. Well, this is really, at the end of the day, Jesus was tempted to be God. And a different way to think about this has to do with asking God to endorse my agenda instead of the other way around. This is how it worked. This is how it worked then. Sometimes we just immediately go to, oh my gosh, Jesus is careening, off of this, he's free falling from this high place. Of course God's going to want to save him. Like that's the only thing. But that's really not the only thing happening here. By the way, notice that the tempter here is quoting Scripture. That's really important to remember, that sometimes the temptations themselves sound really holy, sound like they make sense theologically, even if they don't. What's really happening here is the scenario that's being presented is the tempter is saying, I want you to do something that you know that God would never, ever have you do in the first place. And then, when you choose to jump off, I want you to ask God to correct the thing that you screwed up. That's what's happening. Wanting you to control the deck here, you to be God, which is, I'm going to go do this crazy thing, and then expect God, if God is really faithful, it's like we're manipulating God at this point to do our bidding, instead of us asking the question, what is your will? Now, believe it or not, this happens more often than you think in very subtle ways. And probably, if we're honest, all of us in this room have done this, have given into this temptation. But it doesn't look like throwing yourself off El Capitan or something like that. It looks more, well, right now this week, it looks more like something that would show up on social media. So after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, which is horrible, that kind of violence, we don't want that in our country. Nobody deserves that in our country. It's not who we are. It's not what we want. But the immediate knee-jerk reaction that happened in social media was to immediately jump to conclusions about what the motive was and who was wrong, long before anybody knew who the person was, what motivated that person, all of it. It was nuts. I mean, social media is a mirror for us, right? We get a real picture for what real America is looking like based on the craziness that we see in posts. My hunch is that some of you might be here today because of what happened this week. Not so much Charlie Kirk's assassination, but because of all the noise that happened in response to that. And you're like, man, how do we survive this kind of avalanche of stuff? And the challenging part is that some of the people who are writing are bringing Scripture into the passage, bringing God's will into things, as if to say that their position on what they're believing to be true and why they're believing that their enemies are absolutely false is because God is on their side. We're borrowing the authority of God, saying, God, I want you to join me on my agenda. Now, one party has really leaned into that over the past 40 years or more, really the past 40 years, and have really said they are the Christian party. They are the ones that are trying to do the godly thing, and God language shows up all over the place. And the problem with using God language all over the place is you can start to think, if you got enough Jesus-sounding language here, churchy-sounding language, Christian-sounding language, it must be Christian. But we can guard all kinds of stuff. We can wrap all kinds of things up in pretty packaging, but you're still left with, rotten eggs inside the box. Sometimes, and maybe you weren't one of the social media person that, jumped to conclusions and got in the fight with somebody before we even knew what was going on. And I'm not suggesting that, I'm not blaming social media. I'm not saying it's an awful thing. That's not, don't hear that. We'll actually get to something related to that in a moment. I'm just saying that this is an area where we see this happen. Sometimes that's where we do it. Sometimes it's grandma. And I say grandma because I've heard multiple stories about grandma. And grandma and their granddaughters or their daughters. And grandma is talking to her daughter, so it's more of a mother-daughter. And the daughter is saying, well, I'm going to go to the dance tonight, and this is what I'm wearing. And mom or grandma says, oh, no, you're not wearing that. And they disagree with your wardrobe choice. Or grandma is at the beach with her granddaughter. And it's just a family vacation. It's just family on the beach. There's nobody else around. And the granddaughter is getting excited to get out there on the beach and splash in the water. And she's just about ready to head out the door when grandma says, what are you wearing? Now, granddaughter is wearing a modest two-piece bathing suit. But grandma will have nothing to do with that because only good Christian girls wear one-piece swimsuits. And sometimes grandmas throw in biblical language. So you can use some scripture to just make your point with this about needing to be modest if you're really that, and not wanting to tempt these foolish men who are so weak in the world, which is absolutely true most of the time. So no denying that. You see what I'm saying? We can do that. We can have our agenda, things that we think are really important, and we can easily just bring God along with it. And if we bring enough God language in it and make a pretty good case, some people will actually just believe that. And I hate to tell you this, but sometimes pastors do this, like every week, like you're looking at one right now, because this is part of my role. As I'm supposed to come here and share some insights from our faith tradition that might actually be interesting and informative and help your life some way. Now, I think like most pastors, we take this very seriously, and I pray about, all right, Spirit, where are we going today? Where's the wind blowing for this? Where do I need to take this this week? And I look at the quotes and I look at the scriptures and I read the commentary, and at the end of the day, I end up landing in some direction and I go forward with what I think I'm supposed to say. You as the audience, you're hearing me, and you come and you're putting yourself in my hands, for these moments. And there's a part of you, just by nature of who I am and my role, that you are hearing, okay, how is God going to speak through Pastor Pete today? And so I want to tell you two things. One is I take this real seriously. I want to do the best I can. I want to be honest academically, intellectually, all that, and as a human being, but I also am a human being. I have been shaped by all the forces that have made me me. Sometimes I might really believe that this is what the Spirit of God is calling me to say, and I could be not at all aligned with God. It's entirely possible. The good news is, I think, is I know this capacity. I pay attention to this. I want to make sure that I get as much of me out of the way as possible and just give you what I think is the most important thing. But I will tell you, it's tempting for anybody who's on this kind of a stage and given this kind of authority. It is tempting to do the very same thing that Jesus was tempted to do and borrow the authority of God to endorse whatever case I make. And we know this happens. We know this happens because across the nation today, you're going to have people like me and my understanding and way of thinking that are going to say, that really believe that the fundamental character and nature of God is shalom, which is love, well-being, peace, love, harmony, all that for people individually, in relationship, with creation, the whole thing. That's the picture that in my studies, that's where I'm landing. But there are going to be other pastors and preachers throughout the nation that are talking about, Charlie Kirk got shot because of the godless community and country that we're in, that will not call out certain people for their lifestyles, and therefore this is Satan pushing back. You see what I'm saying? And so you have pastors like me who are saying LGBTQ people are our neighbors, they're us, there's no us and them, we are we. And there are others who are using the voice of God to say just the opposite. I only say this to you, I only bring up this whole thing to help you ask yourself the question, how much does God agree with us before we're going to assume that we have the right thing to say or the godly thing to say? I'll give you a hot tip. This helps me anyway with my framework. Because I believe that God is known as shalom, maybe God is shalom, maybe God is love, to get away from the judge high in the cloud in heaven somewhere with the gavel. Maybe just the Spirit of God is love, is shalom. We're still figuring these things out. Our language escapes us. But for me, if my motivation or the origin of what I'm wanting to say or do is shalom, if the means with which I communicate that is shalom, and my goal is shalom, I'm more than likely going to be at least in the zone of where God wants to go. And so if shalom is your thing, then that's a pretty good rule of thumb. But a distortion of that can also be true. If you believe that God is a judge, is all-powerful, wants to eradicate sin in the world at all costs, then you and I, as the followers of that God, have been deputized to let everybody know how wrong they are, and they better get it together. What are you believing, and how are you sorting out the temptations that will come? These are complicated matters, aren't they? No easy, clean answers. Well, the last temptation that we have has to do with an ungodly shortcut. This is the bow down to me and I'll give you all the riches you ever deserved. This is really asking to bow to the way of the world. It's a way to gain things that maybe Jesus was never meant to have, never wanted to have. It's power, it's control, it's driven by greed, it's driven by domination. And that is so often showing up in our political arena. The people enter into this world for that very reason. Or people get into industry so that they can have that kind of power and influence, and are motivated by greed, are filled by such things, and they can poison the very thing that you're after. So Jesus is just simply recognizing that there is another way here. There's another thing I'm going to bow to. It's not that politics are inherently bad. It's not that industry is particularly bad. It's not that money is inherently bad. But there are different visions that take us to different ways of handling those things. There are temptations with whatever that are not going to take us in the way of shalom in my framework. My question for you and how you're thinking about this is, how are you tempted away from shalom? So in that argument, you're in that conversation with somebody on Facebook or your significant other or a coworker or a friend or what have you, and you can sense that this thing's about to go, this is starting to get hot, and the person you're in the conversation with is starting to get personal, starting to take some jabs that aren't shalomy at all. You are tempted to go right there with them, but you know it's a bad idea to get in that mud. Norman Faber, who was a pastor or a member of my church back in Northern Illinois many years ago, he was a farmer and a car dealer, and he came up to me one time and he said, "Pastor," he talked like this, "Pastor, never mud wrestle with a pig, because you both get muddy and the pig likes it." That's the one thing you're going to remember today, isn't it? Well, don't do that, because one of you is going to like it, and you're both going to get messy. We have the option in our temptation to go to the places that aren't going to be healthy, and it's very, very difficult. So these things all together get back to what Neil Douglas Klotz is saying, that really the heart of this part of the prayer is not, God, don't lead us to temptation, control me away from that. And if you do get me there, then I'm going to blame you for it because it was your idea in the first place. Sort of like the opposite of the devil made me do it. That's not it at all. This whole tone of the prayer is, God, help me stay centered. Help me not give in to these cravings that are going to take me the wrong way. Help me not to assume that you're on board with my agenda when I maybe have not even asked what your agenda might be. And God, don't let me settle for a shortcut to something that is not going to really be who you are or what you're about. There's one other thing, though, that I got to mention that he brings up, Douglas Klotz, in his book, and it has to do with this idea of unripeness, unripe fruit. And he means it in two ways. He's talking about timing here. And what he's saying is that there is a going to take a bite of the unripe fruit. It's not quite ripe yet. Have any of you ever done that, by the way? Have you ever taken a bite out of an apple way too soon, or a peach off a tree, you can't wait anymore, or a nectarine or whatever? You take a bite of that and you know immediately. Your mouth completely dries out, and you know this was a bad idea. And if you're a fool like me who was told to clean your plate, you're going to eat that whole thing anyway, right? So you're going to suffer this unripe nectarine. And what happens to you when you do? Well, it's not an enjoyable experience. It doesn't do for you what you want. In fact, if you eat some fruit too soon, it can mess with your stomach. And that's not fun. So there's this whole idea that's inherent in this prayer, and it shows up in his poetry, where there is timing involved. That sometimes we're tempted to jump too fast. And we certainly saw that with different figures with Charlie Kirk's assassination this week. Jumping right in. We know what happened. We know what this is all about. And of course, when it's time to have any kind of retraction at all, there won't be a retraction. There won't be a social media post from people who just threw up all over the place to say, "Oh, hey, I was totally wrong about that. Sorry for ruining people's day and wasting your time with this. I was wrong. Let's move forward." That never happens, does it? It happened in Joe McCarthy's life, 70 years ago. He was famous for this. Let's keep the headlines focused where I want them to go. I'm going to make accusation after accusation without needing any proof whatsoever. I'm going to ruin lives with what I say, only to find out later, too late, that they were wrong. And then any retraction that might need to be said, nobody cares about at that point. That's an unripe way to live. And we have a responsibility with that, don't we? We don't need to chew that fruit. But then on the other side, there's the overripe. Fruit that's gone too far is also unripe. It's beyond ripe. And he's saying that part of the heartbeat of this story is to ask the question, am I too early? And am I waiting too long? And that waiting too long matters. And it matters even in the wake of the social media storm that we just saw. And again, it is tragic that anybody gets assassinated in the United States. This isn't about Charlie Kirk. That thing's about assassination. But is it possible that sometimes we wait too long to say the right thing, to do the right thing, almost too late? Almost like in our reluctance to do the thing that we sense God nudging us, and we know it's coming from a place of shalom. Our goal is to activate it in shalom, and it's all for shalom and all that, and we sense the nudge to do it, but something in us is tempting us to just say, don't. The problem with that, in some cases, for sure, is that people suffer when we don't. There are many people, many Christians, I believe, in the 1860s in the Deep South that were seeing what was happening with African slaves. And something within them had to be saying, this cannot be right. And especially if they were white people in relationship with some of these African slaves, and it was a real relationship, and they're recognizing, I've been told that they're not quite human, but my experience is they are fully human. We're on par with each other. And this is not jibing with what we've been told by our pastors and science. I think they need to be treated with dignity and respect and as equals. And to say such a thing will sound terrifying. But I wonder if things could have been different. Over 100 years before our country was even founded, I wonder if things could have been different if enough people who sensed the nudge of the fact that we are all created in the image of God, if they would have started to say something about it, despite their fear. Today, we have plenty of things to talk about in Shalomi ways. We've got some atrocious things that are happening being leveled against real human beings. And when real human beings like us don't say things that are going to be in defense of treating other people as real human beings in Shalomi ways, which sometimes is difficult, I think those people suffer. And we see this. We talk a lot about the LGBTQ community here because we need to. We're one of the few churches in Napa that does. And we know that just suicide rates alone, by the way, suicide workshop happening this Wednesday up in Yountville. Sign up for that. It's going to be really, really good. But trans kids in particular are exponentially more likely to give in to suicide ideation and attempt to take their own life. Why? Why? Because of voices of people who are saying, you're not quite human, you're wrong, you need to change, are louder than the ones of the grace and love of God. There is a time when we jump too soon. That's unripe. And there is a time when we do the thing we know we need to do too late. And people suffer. This prayer, this part of Jesus' prayer, is saying, be mindful of where you are so that you can respond from your center. So if you are tempted to grab that candy bar at Trader Joe's, then remember what you learned today. You have an opportunity to center right there. If you open that refrigerator door and you have no idea why, you now have tools to ask yourself, what am I doing here? And do the thing that's best for you. Or if you're just sitting around, a time to be centered and grounded so that you can remain so going forward. So to end our time together, I want to get back to that poem that we started with. But now that you've heard about the meaning behind it from a Jesus language and cultural perspective, maybe the prayer itself will have new meaning to you. So this time, I invite you to say this prayer out loud with me to wrap things up. Let's do it. Don't let surface things delude us, but free us from what holds us back from our true purpose. Don't let us enter forgetfulness, the temptation of false appearances, to the fraud of inner vacillation, like a flag tossed in the wind, alert us. But break the hold of unripeness, the inner stagnation that prevents good fruit. From the evil of injustice, the green fruit and the rotten, grant us liberty. Deceived neither by the outer nor the inner, free us to walk your path with joy. Keep us from hoarding false wealth and from the inner shame of help not given in time. Don't let surface things delude us, but free us from what holds us back. Thanks for coming today. Hope you had a good experience. Thanks again to our kitchen crew for doing all their stuff, and we'll see you next week.